People think they know what meth is. They've seen the mugshots, they've heard the horror stories, they've watched Breaking Bad and think it's just science, chemistry, and crime. They know the stereotypes, the twitching, the scratching, the teeth. It's easy to laugh at, easy to write off. But meth isn't a meme. It's not a punchline. It's one of the most destructive drugs on Earth. Not because it kills you instantly, but because it keeps you alive long enough to ruin everything. It doesn't put you to sleep, it doesn't slow you down. It keeps you alert, awake, wired until your brain snaps. This isn't a drug that sneaks up on you. It shows you exactly what it's doing every step of the way. And the worst part is that once it's in your system, you won't want to stop. This is the real story of methamphetamine. What it is, where it came from, how it rewires your brain, and why people still use it, even when they know it'll destroy them. Methamphetamine is a central nervous system stimulant that works by flooding the brain with a massive, unnatural surge of neurotransmitters, primarily dopamine, but also norepinephrine and serotonin. It's structurally similar to amphetamine, but significantly more potent, more addictive, and more toxic to the brain. On paper, it's just another synthetic stimulant. In practice, it's one of the most destructive drugs ever made. Chemically, meth belongs to the amphetamine family, but its effects are far more intense. The difference between methamphetamine and something like Adderall, which contains mixed amphetamine salts, isn't just dosage. Meth crosses the blood-brain barrier more efficiently and lasts significantly longer. It doesn't just stimulate the brain, it hijacks it. While Adderall might last 4 to 6 hours, meth's effects can stretch up to 12 hours, and that's just the primary high. The aftershocks, like the anxiety, the insomnia, the restlessness, can linger for days. It's not a temporary state, it's a neurological occupation. There is a legal pharmaceutical version of meth called disoxin, approved in rare cases for ADHD or severe obesity, but it's almost never prescribed due to its high abuse potential and stigma. Disoxin is a tiny controlled tablet. Crystal meth, the street version, is a chemically crude, hyper-potent crystalline rock that's usually smoked, snorted, injected, or swallowed. It's often made in small labs using over-the-counter precursors like pseudoepinephrine, lithium, and anhydrous ammonia, the same chemical found in fertilizer and industrial cleaners. The result is an unstable, toxic compound laced with solvents and heavy metals. Once consumed, meth triggers an explosive release of dopamine in the brain's reward centers, far more than the brain is ever meant to handle. Dopamine is the neurotransmitter responsible for pleasure, motivation, and goal-directed behavior. Under normal conditions, it helps reinforce habits and reward survival behaviors. With meth, dopamine levels spike to 10 times the normal amount or more. The user feels unstoppable, powerful, hyper-focused, euphoric. Every movement feels urgent. Every idea feels brilliant. Sleep becomes irrelevant. Food becomes unnecessary. For a while, it can feel like you've unlocked some new level of human functioning. But that feeling doesn't last. The more meth is used, the more it depletes the brain's natural stores of dopamine, and damages the neurons responsible for producing it. Over time, this leads to a total collapse of the reward system. Former users often report being unable to feel motivation, joy, or even interest in any kind of basic tasks without the drug. And this is one of meth's most dangerous features. It doesn't just get you high, it rewrites what your brain thinks normal feels like. Different methods of ingestion produce different timelines and intensities. Smoking meth delivers the fastest and most intense high, hitting within seconds and producing a full-body rush. Snorting is slower and less efficient, but still powerful. Injecting meth bypasses all metabolic barriers and causes an immediate, overwhelming spike in euphoria, but also carries the highest risk of overdose and infection. Oral ingestion produces a longer-lasting but less intense effect, and is less common recreationally. Regardless of the route, the initial effects are the same. Extreme alertness, increased energy, hyperfocus, reduced appetite, and a powerful feeling of control or purpose. But as the dose increases, those effects sharpen into something darker. The user may become agitated, paranoid, or hypersexual. Thoughts loop endlessly. Movements become repetitive. Some users develop compulsive tics or rituals. Cleaning, organizing, skin picking, endless pacing. These aren't just side effects, these are part of the high. The half-life of meth is particularly brutal. While many drugs wear off within a few hours, meth stays active in the bloodstream for 8 to 12 hours or more. Even after the euphoria fades, the user remains wired, twitchy, and emotionally volatile. And when the come-down hits, it hits hard. The dopamine crash is immediate and unforgiving. Users are left feeling anxious, exhausted, pressed, and deeply emotionally numb. Sleep becomes impossible even though the body is begging for it. Appetite returns with intensity, but digestion is often impaired. The user both feels overstimulated and dead inside, a state that leads many to dose again just to feel functional. Methamphetamine is not a drug that fades out slowly. It doesn't wear off like alcohol or weed. It crashes like a system overload, and every crash leaves behind less of the person who used it. Over time, meth users lose their ability to regulate emotion, impulse, and attention, not just while high, but in general. Brain scans of long-term users show reduced gray matter, especially in the prefrontal cortex, which controls decision-making and self-awareness. The damage isn't just chemical, it's architectural. What makes meth especially dangerous is that it doesn't require long-term use to catch these changes. Even occasional binging, staying awake for days, redosing to avoid the crash, can trigger psychosis, paranoia, and even hallucinations. Some users begin seeing shadow people after just a few runs. And these aren't really hallucinations in the psychedelic sense. They're full-blown breaks from reality. Delusions of persecution, insects inside the skin, government surveillance, friends turning into enemies. Meth doesn't just amplify your fears, it gives them form. Despite all of this, meth remains popular. In rural communities, it's often the cheapest and most accessible stimulant. In urban areas, it's cut into party drugs or used in combination with opioids. Among manual laborers, it's seen as a performance tool, something to power through shifts or survive homelessness. Its appeal isn't an escapism, it's an utility. Meth doesn't transport you to another world, it makes you feel like you can handle this one, until it completely strips away your ability to live in it. Now, methamphetamine wasn't born in the streets, it was born in a lab. The first known synthesis of methamphetamine happened in 1919 in Japan, by a chemist who was originally working with ephedrine, a naturally occurring stimulant found in the ma huang plant. Ephedrine was already used in traditional medicine for energy and bronchial relief, but scientists were looking for something more concentrated, more stable, and more powerful. What they created was methamphetamine hydrochloride, odorless, crystalline, and extremely potent. In the early years, it was seen as a medical breakthrough. It was prescribed to treat narcolepsy, depression, fatigue, and even asthma. But the drug's real impact came during war. By the time World War II broke out, methamphetamine had been weaponized. The German military distributed it under the name Pervitin, a small white tablet issued to Nazi soldiers to help them march longer, fight harder, and stay alert for days at a time. Entire divisions were fueled by it. It became known as Stuka pills, named after the Luftwaffe's dive bombers. Pervitin wasn't just tolerated, it was encouraged, with official army documents praising its ability to boost morale and aggression. Adolf himself reportedly received regular injections of methamphetamine in the final years of the war, prescribed by his personal physician, Dr. Theodore Morell. And the Japanese weren't far behind. Meth was given to kamikaze pilots before suicide missions, believed to suppress fear and to amplify focus in the final moments before death. In the United States, military-issue amphetamine was common during the war, primarily in the form of benzedrine, a weaker cousin to meth. But after the war ended, meth found a new footing back home. The pharmaceutical industry began marketing it to civilians, especially housewives, students, and laborers, under names like methedrin and obertrol. It was promoted as a diet pill, a mood booster, and energy supplement. For a while, it was everywhere, legally prescribed, easily refillable, and sold under the banner of American productivity. In the 1950s and 60s, meth use became especially common among truck drivers and night shift workers. It was the perfect fuel for people who needed to stay awake, focused, and moving. Entire professions quietly built meth into their routines, and the pills were widely accepted as a part of working class life. But behind the scenes, the drug's darker side was starting to show. As awareness of addiction and abuse grew, the government began tightening regulations on meth prescriptions, but that didn't stop the demand. It just pushed it underground. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, outlaw motorcycle gangs like the Hells Angels started cooking meth themselves, using over-the-counter ingredients and backwoods chemistry. These were not professional operations. They were garage labs, farmhouse labs, setups in trailers and barns with homemade glassware and stolen chemicals. This era marked the drug's shift from pharmaceutical to criminal. Meth stopped being something you picked up at the pharmacy and became something that you bought from a guy with a burner phone and a gas mask. The homemade versions were more impure, more volatile, and often laced with toxic byproducts, but they were cheap, powerful, and easy to sell. The motorcycle gangs dominated meth distribution for years, especially on the West Coast. In places like California's Central Valley, meth labs became as common as cornfields. Clandestine chemists developed new recipes, better yields, and purer products. And as the DEA cracked down on one method, another would take its place. Meth production became a cat-and-mouse game between chemistry and enforcement, but the demand never slowed. In rural America, meth became a way to survive poverty. In cities, it was a way to work longer shifts or stay out all night. And in both places, the consequences were starting to become visible. Users weren't just getting high, they were breaking down, physically, mentally, socially. And unlike heroin or cocaine, meth didn't come with a built-in pause. It didn't knock them out, it kept them up long enough to destroy everything. By the 1980s, the US meth crisis was fully underway. And what started as a lab experiment in Japan, then a soldier's pill, then a housewife's prescription, had become something darker, something feral. Meth wasn't a medical compound anymore. It was a chemical rebellion, an outlaw substance cooked in sheds and trailers, passed through small towns, and consumed by people who just needed to keep going. Meth isn't just an American crisis. It's a global drug with different faces depending on where you find it. In Southeast Asia, the dominant form is called shabu, usually crystalline meth smoked in small glass pipes. In the Philippines, shabu has become entrenched since the 1980s, spreading through urban poverty and tightly packed neighborhoods where it became a way to stay awake, work longer hours, or suppress hunger. Its popularity was one of the driving justifications behind Rodrigo Duterte's violent war on drugs, which has killed thousands of users and small-time dealers, but has done little to slow shabu's supply. In countries like Thailand and Myanmar, meth is often produced in massive jungle labs by organized crime groups like the United Wa State Army, then trafficked across borders hidden in trucks or boats. More info on that kind of thing if you want to learn more about that in my Drug Smuggling Methods Iceberg. In these regions, meth use is less about partying and more about survival and labor, a cheap, long-lasting stimulant in economies where exhaustion is constant. In Australia and New Zealand, meth, often called ice, is linked heavily to outlaw motorcycle gangs, echoing its history with American biker groups. These organizations control distribution networks, moving meth from Asian suppliers into local markets. Australia has one of the highest meth prices in the world due to strict border controls, but that hasn't slowed demand. The drug's high profit margins make it central to organized crime, and its spread has put enormous pressure on emergency health services, which see rising cases of meth psychosis and violence in hospitals and police custody. In these countries, meth has a strong association with both nightlife and working class communities, bridging the gap between recreational use and functional dependence. Perhaps the most unusual story, though, comes from North Korea, where meth is reportedly produced not just by criminals, but at times by the state itself. Since at least the 1990s, during North Korea's economic collapse, meth has been manufactured as both a domestic product and an export commodity. Reports suggest that for years, meth was so common inside the country that it was used socially, even given as a kind of gift during visits. Outside its borders, smuggling networks have pushed North Korean meth into China and beyond, turning it into an unofficial economic lifeline. While it's impossible to verify the full scale, defectors and intelligence agencies describe meth as one of the country's most reliable underground exports, a drug doubling as a survival tool for a government under sanctions. What ties all these regions together is how meth adapts to the needs of the society around it. In poor communities, it becomes a tool for labor and survival. In wealthier but stressed societies, it becomes a performance enhancer and social lubricant. In criminal economies, it becomes a high-value commodity. Unlike heroin or cocaine, which depend on specific crops and regions, meth is synthetic. It can be made anywhere that there's access to precursors and equipment. That makes it both flexible and resilient, a drug that molds itself to its environment, thriving in places of instability, poverty, and desperation. Meth rarely kills through overdose in the way opioids do. Instead, most meth-related emergencies are behavioral, not medical. Hospitals see patients brought in not because they've stopped breathing, but because they're in the middle of a violent psychotic break. ER staff are often overwhelmed by users who arrive dehydrated, paranoid, aggressive, or completely incoherent. These cases don't get treated and released quickly. They can take hours of restraint, sedation, and monitoring. And unlike a single-dose overdose, meth psychosis can persist long after the drug has left the bloodstream, sometimes requiring days of observation. Policing meth-related incidents is equally draining. When someone's tweaking, it often takes multiple officers just to contain the situation. Meth can give users a surge of adrenaline and physical stamina, making restraint difficult and risky for everyone involved. Many police departments describe meth calls as among the most resource-intensive emergencies they face, not because of death, but because of the chaos that the drug can cause in public spaces. Incidents can drag on for hours, requiring negotiation, restraint, or even SWAT-style interventions when paranoia turns into barricades or weapons use. The psychiatric system is also heavily strained by meth use. Many users who break down publicly end up in jail cells, not treatment centers. Law enforcement becomes the first point of healthcare, with people cycling between brief psychiatric holds, incarceration, and release them back into the same environment that drives their use. Clinics and rehab facilities often lack resources for long-term meth recovery, so the revolving door continues. Instead of seeing overdoses, America's meth crisis is visible in emergency rooms, police logs, and overcrowded jails. Institutions forced to handle mental health collapses rather than direct poisonings. When most people think of meth today, they don't picture a rural trap house or a burned-out motel bathroom. They picture a man in a hazmat suit, a science teacher, a genius with nothing left to lose, mixing pure blue crystals in a state-of-the-art lab. They picture Walter White. When Breaking Bad premiered in 2008, it didn't just become one of the most critically acclaimed shows of all time. It changed the way an entire generation saw meth. It took a chaotic, often grotesque reality and transformed it into a story about power, logic, and control. And for millions of people, it became their only reference point for how meth is made, sold, and used. The show's hook was brilliant. Take a quiet, overlooked man and give him a reason to fight back. Not with violence, but with chemistry. Walt doesn't just sell meth, he invents it, purifying it to an almost mythological level. Crystal blue persuasion, pure 99% product, treated like gold. The show obsessed over the process, burners, glassware, reagents, turning meth production into something precise, even beautiful. For audiences, this wasn't about getting high, it was about mastering chaos through science. It was an empire. But that version of the meth world, while technically accurate in some areas, is wildly incomplete. The real meth scene doesn't look like a super lab. It looks like a shed behind a trailer park, or a storage unit filled with bleach and battery acid. There's no blue crystal or purity standard. The average cook isn't a chemist, they're someone who learned from a friend, bought stolen pseudoepinephrine, and mixed everything in a stolen crock pot. In Breaking Bad, meth is a character, powerful, pure, clean. In real life, meth is a street drug, cut with poison, sold to survive. Walt never smokes it, Jesse quits using it. Most of the people who do are either portrayed as villains or victims, not central characters. The show is about what meth does to an industry, not what it does to a body. That's not a flaw, it's a choice, but it means the show, for all its brilliance, never really shows what meth feels like. There's no tweaking in Breaking Bad, no psychosis, no picking picking at skin until it bleeds. No hallucinating voices or shadows in the corner. The only time we really see Meth's effects is when it's convenient to the plot. Otherwise, the drug is kept symbolic. Meth's high is immediate and overwhelming, within seconds of smoking or injecting it, and minutes if snorted or swallowed. The brain is flooded with dopamine at levels hundreds of times higher than what it could ever produce naturally. That flood doesn't just feel good, it feels like the best you've ever felt in your life, compressed into a single rush. Confidence spikes, every insecurity disappears, and energy feels infinite. For some, it's hypersexuality that hits first, an intense obsessive fixation on touch and stimulation. For others, it's pure productivity, a sense that they can think faster, talk faster, and do more than anyone else in the room. In that first stretch, sleep and hunger vanish completely. Hours pass without notice, small problems feel solvable, social anxiety fades, and the body feels light and quick. But Meth's half-life can be 12 hours or more, and the intensity doesn't plateau gently. It pushes until the body starts to fray. Jaws clench, muscles tense, and skin takes on a crawling sensation that's impossible to scratch away. Anxiety that was gone an hour ago now flips into paranoia. The same heightened senses that made colors and sounds sharper now make shadows look suspicious, and silence feel threatening. By the come down, users are often trapped in compulsive behaviors, pacing, sorting, taking apart and reassembling objects, or picking at skin until it bleeds. Hallucinations are common after long binges. Sometimes it's shadow people, sometimes it's phantom bugs under the skin, sometimes just the absolute conviction that someone is watching from outside. Sleep becomes impossible even when exhaustion sets in. With chronic use, these effects start showing up even during the high. That initial wired and creative phase shortens, replaced faster and faster by twitching, repetitive motion, and mental loops. The drug stops feeling like an enhancement and starts feeling like a compulsion, a chemical override that tells the brain to keep going long after the body should have stopped. Meth tears through the body in ways that are visible within months and permanent within years. The infamous meth mouth comes from a combination of extreme dry mouth, teeth grinding, and the acidic nature of the smoke itself. Saliva normally protects enamel, but meth's chemical effects shut down its production, leaving teeth unprotected while users clench their jaws for hours. Add in poor diet, high sugar intake during binges, and neglect of basic hygiene, and teeth can rot down to the gum line in a matter of months. Skin lesions are another hallmark. Chronic users often experience formication, the sensation of insects crawling under the skin, which leads to constant scratching and picking. Even without that hallucination, meth makes small imperfections feel unbearable, triggering obsessive grooming that turns minor blemishes into open sores. Combined with poor circulation and weakened immune function, these wounds heal slowly and scar easily, giving skin a pitted, unhealthy look. The drug also accelerates physical aging. Meth triggers massive oxidative stress and cell damage, which breaks down collagen and elastin in the skin, thins muscle mass, and damages small blood vessels. A user in their late 20s can begin to look decades older within just a few years of heavy use. Inside the brain, the damage is worse. Chronic meth use erodes gray matter in areas responsible for memory, decision-making, and emotional regulation. Long-term users can experience permanent psychosis, hallucinations, delusions, and paranoia that don't fully go away even after quitting. The stimulant's constant overactivation of dopamine systems is linked to lasting changes in brain chemistry that resemble schizophrenia, making recovery a lifelong process rather than a quick detox. On top of that, meth use patterns make this destruction even more severe. Many users stay awake for 3 to 10 days straight, pushing their bodies into extreme sleep deprivation, malnutrition, and dehydration before finally crashing. The crash itself can last days, marked by deep depression, physical pain, and an inability to feel pleasure without the drug. Meth doesn't just wear a person down, it rewires them. Neural pathways shift toward compulsive seeking and use, while parts of the brain responsible for control and reasoning weaken. Over time, the drug stops being something a person takes for a high and becomes the baseline their body operates on, making every moment without it feel like falling apart. Meth addiction works differently from opioids, but it's no less destructive. The body doesn't go into violent physical withdrawal the way it does with heroin, but meth creates a neurological dependency that's extremely difficult to break. When meth floods the brain, it releases massive amounts of dopamine like we've talked about. This overstimulation not only produces that intense high, but it also forces the brain to adapt by reducing its natural dopamine production and destroying some of the dopamine transporters in the process. That means even when the drug wears off, the brain struggles to regulate mood, motivation, and reward. After the high, the dopamine crash hits hard. Users often describe it as an emotional void, exhaustion, deep depression, irritability, and in many cases, suicidal thoughts. It's not just being tired or sad. The brain's reward system is so depleted that even basic activities like eating or talking feel completely meaningless. This is why meth relapse rates are so high. The sober state is not just normal, it's actively worse than normal for a long time after quitting. Cravings are one of the most persistent aspects of meth addiction. They're triggered by stress, boredom, sexual arousal, certain social situations, or anything associated with past use. The brain forms strong learned associations between meth and pleasure or excitement. This is called cue-induced craving, and with meth, it's particularly strong because the drug floods the brain so powerfully that those memory links become deeply ingrained. Even years later, a single trigger can cause overwhelming urges to use again. The identity shift is another key factor. Meth doesn't just make people feel high, it can make them feel like they've unlocked a better, more capable version of themselves. At the start, many users report increased productivity, sharper focus, improved mood, and a heightened sense of confidence. The drug often gets tied to social skills, sexual performance, or creativity. Over time, the person begins to feel they're not as smart, interesting, or attractive without it, and daily life feels inadequate without that chemical boost. Detoxing from meth is grueling in a different way from detoxing from depressants or opioids. There's often no dramatic vomiting, sweating, or seizures, but instead, there's overwhelming fatigue, difficulty sleeping, paranoia, anxiety, and a horrifying concept known as anhedonia, which is a complete inability to feel pleasure. This emotional flatness can last for weeks, sometimes months, especially in long-term heavy users. During this period, the brain is slowly trying to rebuild dopamine function and repair damaged neural pathways. Sleep patterns are often heavily disrupted, with some people experiencing vivid nightmares or hypersomnia and followed by insomnia. The relapse risk is highest during this early recovery period because life without meth feels unbearably slow and muted compared to the chemically supercharged state the brain got used to. Without strong support systems and coping strategies, many fall back into use simply to escape the crushing emptiness. This cycle, massive dopamine spikes followed by extreme depletion, is what traps people. Even when they understand the damage meth causes, the memory of how it once made them feel can override all rational thought. Meth today isn't the drug it was in the 90s rave scene or the biker lab era. It's shifted into something far grimmer. In most parts of the US, it's not a party drug anymore. It's a poverty drug, a grind drug, a trauma drug. It shows up in communities where people are working exhausting, low-paying jobs, or trying to survive without stable housing. Sex workers use it to stay awake and keep working through the night. Manual laborers take it to push through back-breaking shifts without breaks. Students, especially in underfunded schools or those juggling multiple jobs, sometimes turn to it for cramming and overnight study binges. And among the homeless, meth's long-lasting high offers both warmth in cold weather and the ability to stay alert during danger. It's increasingly embedded in rural America, where it's replacing opioids in many places. In towns hit hard by the pill mill crackdowns and the fentanyl crisis, Meth fills the gap. It's cheap, easy to find, and lasts much longer than heroin. Dealers don't need to convince people to switch. The economics and availability make the choice for them. And in many areas, meth is no longer just locally cooked biker meth. The supply chain has shifted toward ultra-pure, industrial-grade meth from Mexican super labs, flooding the market with product that's far stronger than what users were smoking or snorting 20 years ago. The overlap between meth and opioids is where the death toll has started to spike. Goofballs, meth mixed with heroin or fentanyl, are extremely common. Sometimes it's intentional, chasing both the stimulation of meth and the sedation of opioids. Other times, fentanyl is simply cut into meth without warning, meaning people with no opioid tolerance can fatally overdose after one hit. This combo also makes quitting harder. The body gets hooked on both drug classes, each with its own withdrawal profile. Law enforcement and emergency responders aren't just dealing with overdoses anymore. They're dealing with meth psychosis on a massive scale. The majority of meth-related 911 calls in many cities aren't for people passed out, they're for people running into traffic, stripping naked in public, smashing windows, or barricading themselves in buildings during paranoid episodes. These aren't just short-lived freakouts either. Meth psychosis can last for days, even after the drug leaves the system, and can tip into permanent schizophrenia-like symptoms. For police, EMTs, and hospital workers, this means more violent encounters, more psychiatric holds, and more strain on already overburdened systems. And this is meth's modern reality. Not glamorous, not clean, not clever. It's a drug woven deep into cycles of exhaustion, poverty, and survival. And the damage it causes isn't just in bodies or brains, it's in the neighborhoods that have adapted to living with it. And that's about all I can say about meth, guys. Thanks for watching this video, and again, I'm not glamorizing this drug at all, obviously. Anyone who glamorizes this drug is an idiot. But yeah, thanks for watching. Good night, everyone, and sweet dreams.